remarks, and I'm not going to be able to go through all of them. I'll just focus on what I think the two main claims are, and then I'm going to raise 3 questions in relation to those main claims, and those are my thoughts on another universalism. So in the chapter, Seyla puts forward what she thinks is a discourse theoretic account of human rights that can help us recast the universalism of human rights, sort of steering a middle course between, on the one hand, essentialist universalism, something that has to do with what human beings fundamentally are like who are humans, and on the other hand, the absolute rejection of universalism, which is ethnocentric nationalism or ethnocentrism. And the understanding of universalism that emerges out of the discourse theoretic account of human rights is of a universalism as an aspiration, as a work in progress, so to speak. We're trying to get there and always struggling between, and here I'm quoting, trying to reach commonality across diversity, conflict, divide, and struggle. So this is a type of universalism that Seyla is trying to outline in this particular chapter. And the way we get there is a particular understanding of rights claims in general and human rights claims in particular. And this is a discourse theoretic understanding of rights claims and human rights claims. And I've set out on the handout what rights claim are, structurally speaking, from Seyla's perspective, and then specifically what human rights claim are. And behind the understanding of both these types of rights claim is a certain account of human communicative agency. So rights claims, Seyla suggests, take the following form, and I'm just going to read out the quote here. I can justify to you, with good reasons, that you and I should respect each other's reciprocal claim to act in certain ways and not to act in others, and to enjoy certain resources and services. So rights claims have this reciprocal justificatory structure in general, and clearly presuppose communicative agency. If I don't have communicative agency, I cannot justify things to others and be the recipient of justification. Human rights in particular are seen as the sort of condition for the possibility of the exercise and the making of rights claims, and that's why Seyla refers to the Hannah Arendt famous definition of a right to have rights. So human rights in general protect the communicative freedom of individuals, and so they offer this articulation of the right to have rights, that is, people's entitlement to be in a position in which they can make right claims, in which they can make reciprocal claims on others and have therefore their communicative freedom acknowledged, respected, and protected. So when I have my human rights respected, I am in a position where I can make claim rights defined in the first quotation that I have there. And this discourse theoretic account of human rights is meant to also help us understand what kind of legal provisions within existing political systems should be guaranteed such that people really are in a position to participate in discourse characterized, as Seyla says, by equality, symmetrical entitlements to participation, reciprocity. This goes back to the idea of democratic iterations, I guess, and the particular conditions that have to be there, and within which then people can be genuinely in a position to make these rights claims, these reciprocal justifications. I claim and try to justify with good reasons that you do not or do act in certain ways towards me and vice versa. So I take these two to be the main claims of the chapter. As I said, there's more to it than this, but just in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on these two. And these are, I think, all I need at least to raise my 3 points for discussion. Now, I move on to the second part, that is my thoughts on this discourse theoretic account of human rights. And I'll just start off by making 2 assumptions discourse theoretic account, I asked myself, so what would a good philosophical account of rights in general and of human rights in particular have to look like? What kind of criteria would it have to satisfy? And, looking at the structure of rights claim, an easy answer seems to be, well, it should give us some plausible guidance with respect to who might count as a right holder in general and of human rights in particular, what qualify as the content of rights in general and specifically human rights in particular, and thirdly, who the bearers of the duties correlative to human rights are. So we want a little bit of guidance with respect to A, X, and B, so as I put it on the handout. Now, I realize that maybe the idea of guidance needs to be qualified. So there are the orthodox philosophical approaches, perhaps, analytic philosophical approaches to human rights. And they might want to give us full guidance on everything. And then there are more perhaps democratically inspired discourse theoretic approaches whereby the guidance will have to be of a different kind. We do not want the philosophers to exactly legislate everything that defines rights in general, because that would be somewhat anti-democratic. So I can see that already, once we are within the discourse theoretic approach, the type of guidance is going to be somewhat different. But there will have to be at least some guidance of some sort that strikes us as plausible for the account to be successful. That is the minimal assumption that I'm making, but maybe even that is too thick, I'm not sure. And now I'm just going to raise three questions or three worries about the guidance that the approach that Seyla puts forward can give us in relation to right holders, content of the rights, and duty bearers. So first of all, who may hold rights in general and human rights in particular? And Seyla, in the book, admits that any plausible one worries about the extent to which the approach is giving us enough guidance. Can we rule out certain possible interpretations of equality and symmetry and rule in others? And when we do so, do we end up potentially having such a thick account of these conditions that our theory of human rights becomes even more demanding than, I don't know, Rawls's theory of justice? So that's the second worry. And then finally, the third worry concerns who qualify as the bearers of the duties correlative to human rights. And this is actually not necessarily a worry, just a question of clarification. So Seyla emphasizes that on the discourse theoretic approach, human rights are not pre-political. And I'm very sympathetic personally to this claim, but at various points in this chapter it seems to me that this non-pre-political nature of human rights was characterized in different ways. And I guess there's a weak characterization that I found on page 68 and a stronger one that I thought I found on page 74, but 74, but I'm not exactly sure. So on a weak characterization of the non-political nature of human rights are necessarily relational. And if that's what Seyla means, then it seems to me that the account doesn't necessarily differ so much from other accounts of human rights that have a different understanding of agency, just because of the very nature of rights claims. So if rights claims always involve a right holder, a duty bearer, and a certain content, they are relational by nature. So it doesn't make sense to talk about rights or human rights if you have a man on an island, just by the very nature of the structure of the rights claim. The second, stronger, which I think was perhaps the one that Seyla was subscribing to, but again I'm not quite sure, is the idea that human rights can only exist and make sense within certain complex background political structure. And that is because only those political structures can bear the duties that are correlative to rights in general and specifically, actually specifically human rights in particular. So the idea here is that if that's what we think, then the state, for instance, or other public institutions, I'm not necessarily just being wedded to a statist understanding, whatever we think public political institutions are, would qualify as appropriate bearers. But if only these kinds of institutions can violate human rights. So if a state official shoots at you for no particular reason, your human rights are being violated. However, if your neighbor murders you, your human rights have not been violated, although some other rights of yours might have been violated. So the question is, which one of these two understandings of human rights is being political do you subscribe to? If the latter, then what this would mean is only political institutions, however you want to conceive of them, can be the bearers of the duties correlative to human rights. And that would seem, though, to go against the definition of rights. So I'm just puzzled about that. And I think that concludes my...
Thank you very much, Sharon. So on that, Professor Benhabib will now talk about 2 minutes, and then...
Well, excellent. Thank you so much. Very lucid, something to be said for analytical political philosophy, a lot actually, which I studied as well, so I shouldn't be done. Okay, tough questions. Let me begin on the question of who may hold human rights. And I don't want to bite the bullet. I don't want to bite the bullet, and I want to instead elaborate more on my concept of communicative agency, because, this kind of objection has arisen with respect to communicative ethics more broadly, because it just seems to be such an awfully limited view of ethics in general, let alone human rights, to make communicative agency now understood in the limited sense of capacity for a natural language. Okay? So I give a very limited definition of it, but this is not fully what I have in mind. And I have also said that communicative agency involves these dual dimensions of being the generalized and the concrete other. And those concepts come in this chapter, and they are important because every communicative agent is, from the standpoint, of course, from this standpoint, is like every other, and yet at the same time, this dimension of the concrete other, that your specific needs, a bodily characteristic situation, that we are never just the other, but we are always the generalized and the concrete other. So that communication, if you understand it in the sense also of the generalized and the concrete other, does not just involve the capacity for full discursive rational speech. Babies communicate all the time. People, with disabilities communicate all the time. With varieties, I mean, there is a range here. But what is important here is the reciprocity claim. That the claim to rights is one that we address to one another, and even if the power of the other is non-symmetrical, right? Maybe in that sense it is somewhat derivative of the symmetrical power involved in rights. But I'm not willing to say that communicative agency simply means the capacity to be a graduate student. Right? I mean, so we need to, but it's just that's a very fair claim. But I do want to insist on this notion of the generalized and the concrete other as expanding the concept of communicative agency. The content of rights, yes. This was already coming up in today's discussion, and it is indeed related to the question that Ceyla was also raising. Why is the discourse theorist so reluctant to identify the content? Well, one has to identify some kind of a minimum content, and I do that by talking about a concept versus a conception of human rights further along in the chapter. But the interesting thing is that beyond the minimal identification of what is in normally sort of you come up to the question that every expansion of the list involves a philosophical argument, involves some kind of an argument. And it also involves further and further interpretation. Let me try to be more precise on this. Look at the huge discussion that is now currently going on between James Griffin and Joseph Rass. Some of you may be familiar with this, about the extent of human rights and international human rights declarations and so on. Now, Griffin says, the philosopher can accept or reject some of the rights that are listed on these international documents. And he says, you can give them the cold shoulder. Rass says, well, if your account of human rights is so unrelated to whatever international practice and obligatory document that is out there, then what kind of a conception in general is this? And so Rass wants to talk about the political conception versus, Gibbon's more traditional. Now, what I'm trying to do is, it's not just splitting the middle. I mean, I believe that, you have to have some conception of human agency. So in that sense, the traditional view is there, but as you correctly pointed out, I have a much more interactive, reciprocity-oriented understanding. Then the political conception raises the issue. So yes, so what do we as philosophers and our grocery list, what do we do prior to that. Now, one way in which to approach this is to look at what Habermas may call the principle of rights and a schedule of rights. The principle of rights, and this gets a little bit to your last point as well. The principle of rights is that rights claims press towards juridification. This is my formula. Human rights have always understood to be both moral and juridical, and I think that they are at their core moral claims, but some press towards juridification, which can only then be instituted in a political community. Now, the interesting issue is the translation of the one to the other. Again, taking claims such as equality, not even equality of opportunity versus equality of resources, a whole discussion that is called equality of what. But look at the concept of equality as a human right in terms of pressing, or I'm using this language, pressing towards juridification or intensification. Now, for me, the interesting issue is the back and forth between the juridico-political sense and, the normative moral sense, and the way in which this conversation or this tension between the terms can go on. So, in that sense, when I say there is no pre-political conception, what I'm also saying is that rights discourse is the discourse, of course, of human beings in interactional context, not just the state. But today, some of the most interesting discussion is really about the relationship between any kind of theoretical account and the practical or the political conception. Yeah. Let me just stay here and.
Right. Thank you very much. So, unfortunately, I don't know everyone in the audience, so in some cases I may point at you or try and describe you rather than talk you by name. But if you can put your hands up and I'll take a list of questions. Would you like to start? Andrew, so.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could just push a little more on this question of rights, claims, and privileges and so forth. So, it's true that babies communicate, but
rights claim. Now, the other always has a claim upon me, a moral claim, not to inflict suffering. But then let's start talking about the more positive aspect, to also not to inflict suffering, but also what? Not to hinder, harm their personality, right? So at that point we start describing kind of personality, and we go beyond. And I'm saying at that point we have to think of it possibly analogically. I mean, I have, of course, the different but there are personhood claims in there, and that personhood comes from this interactive capacity and the texture, and I don't want to just reduce it to a capacity for rational agency. I call it embedded agency, and that's a term that I have used. So very difficult questions in moral philosophy, and I think that my answer would be that there are obligations, moral claims, and obligations that others have upon me in virtue of their being embedded vulnerable beings. Not all are of a kind of rights claim, and maybe I have to think of the rights claim at its core as a communicative agency claim, and that try to extend it. Helpful.
Right, so I've got a kind of clarificatory question and a critical question. The relationship between human rights and the right to have rights and sort of rights. And so it seems to me that there are four positions, three of which at different times you hold and one you don't. So one is that human rights are the basis for the right to have rights. In other words, that the presuppositions of communicative agency and discussing rights are human rights. The second one is that the basis for human rights is the right to have rights. In other words, that what human rights are those which emerge from discourse ethics and rationality. And then the third position is that human rights are basic rights that are reiterated by the right to have rights. In other words, they take on different forms, they're discussed within that. Then the third position is that the right to have rights is more like what Jeremy Walker and William Cobbett calls the right of rights. In other words, it's because of reasonable disagreements that one has about the nature of rights that one has to have democratic ways of specifying. That seems to me to be the position we don't hold. Now, the first two positions, that human rights are the basis for the right to have rights, or that human rights are the basic rights that are the rights that emerge from the right to have rights, are universalistic discourses. In other words, you could have an ideal theory of those, and then you could specify the right holder and what the rights are and who the duty holder is in kind of ideal universal terms. But the third one, which is that human rights are basic rights that are reiterated by the right to have rights, and the fourth one, which I don't think will help the right to rights, those are more what we call real discourses. In other words, within those discourses, it's who the right holder is, what right they have, and who has the duty is something which is specified within the discourse itself. But then that means that they lose in a certain sense. I mean, there are two aspects which I think are problematic for you. One is that they may not be universal, but going to be specific to a particular political community. The other is, unless you have popular sovereignty, which is, if you like, worldwide. You have a worldwide, because otherwise, so you would have to do precisely what you also don't want to do, which is to specify a form of popular sovereignty which is linked to a particular political community. So I suppose what I'm talking about here really
is interesting now is, although she had much to say about the right to have rights, she did not elaborate on that original right to be recognized as one that is entitled to juridical polity rights. Now, I say that that's the communicative structure, the reciprocity of right claims, that this is the what makes you, a person with the right to have rights is the fact that I cannot have any such rights. We cannot enter even into a discourse about rights, you and I, into a meaningful discourse without presupposing that we each are equally entitled to that reciprocity. I mean, this is the general move. So I think that human rights corresponds to that first claim, namely the right to have rights. So the issue would be, what kind of constraints does that norm of recognition of your personality impose then upon the right to have rights? I mean, what kind of constraints does that, let's call it the recognition of your moral, juridical, political personality impose upon the second dimension, which comes back, to the question of the list and why are you not giving the list? So I guess I am moving towards your third alternative of iterations, but I really would have to think a little bit more carefully about the language of, basis, basis. Now, the dilemma seems to me to be the following. I distinguish, and this has to do with the notion of popular sovereignty as well. I distinguish between a concept and a conception of human rights further along in one of my essays. A conception of human rights for me is an interpretation of the minimal rights claims in terms of a popular sovereign. Now, the general philosophical tendency has been to want to sort of pin down that concept. Well, yes, of course. I mean, there are, yes, at a minimal level. Let us begin by talking about, life, liberty, participation. Then we start the discussion. What about welfare rights? Is there really an equal right or is there a right to the equal value of liberty, as John Rawls said? Well, at that point, we already seem to be starting to talk about structures of economic freedom, i.e. we are beginning to interpret equality in terms of some notion of the popular sovereign. So we know what this dilemma is, and I'm trying to maybe sit on the horns of this dilemma a little bit too much because I really don't know, what good it is to generate a list and then, try to sort of measure it. I mean, just to complete these thoughts, if you read the UDHR, just to take one document, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights or the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights are much more expensive. If you read the UDHR, after the first 4 or 5 articles about, dignity, liberty, equality, the rest of it is all about due process in the law. Right? It's about really civil rights. It's about the right to open trial. It's about the right of how due process is to be executed, and so on. So there is a way in which the list ends up being either too minimal or insufficiently interpreted. As in the case of Rawls, the list is minimal, but why does he preclude the right to self-determination? So it is this difficulty about how the philosopher should enter this
quite a nice list of people now, so I'll try and keep people to get their questions comparatively short so we can get in and out on time. So the gentleman at the back with the red shirt.
Yeah, I've got a question which is sort of rolled in an inspiration, so but only that. So it's about the foundations or the need or the depth of foundations in a theory of communicative agency, which you say is required versus a more pluralist view of several philosophical projects being able to support a theory of human rights. And you mentioned the UDHR, and of course what comes to mind is a famous statement by Valentini in this context. I mean, we all agree on human rights so long as nobody asks us why. So I mean, that is so the question here is, if we proceed from the Rawlsian intuition that human rights provide an answer to a question of moral justification of coercive power, I mean, coercive law, then we might have a framework which is broader, which does not force to rely on a specific, very demanding, comprehensive philosophical view about communicative agency, which my concern is might make the project unnecessarily contentious. But it's not a shadow theory because it still provides grounding for socioeconomic rights, for example. So it's not just negative human rights, but it is more demanding than that. So the question just to me is the philosophical approach unnecessarily contentious?
No, is my short answer. I don't mean this to be, and I just revisited this question again in a recent article in Constellations. Permit me one self-reference, and then it's called Rights Giving, Reason Giving and Rights Bearing, and concerning the subject of rights. Rawls's claim about an overlapping consensus, or if that's what you're referring to, Oliver, and his justification of rights is in terms of human rights, in particular, minimal standard of a well-ordered political institutions for all peoples, right? It's not just a moral justification of coercive power. I cannot see for life of me how one can have a concept of rights without a concept of some form of agency. And you cannot, and that is not the same thing as a thick account. I mean, I try to give here a rather thin account. It's not the same as a thick account of human dignity, which a lot of people are trying to do now. It's not the same as a controversial, commitment to human nature. Whether we are lambs or wolves, I'm not saying anything about that. There is no theory of human psychology behind this conception, but it is a kind of speech immanent conception of agency that looks at the structure of rights claims as Lara so well analyzed, and to see what kinds of concept of person or agent we must presuppose. I don't see why that would have to be controversial. I don't see why that part of it would have to be controversial. The more controversial aspects would have to come further along. Like if I were attributing a very thick concept of autonomy to the communicative agent, which I'm not.
So
It's a short answer to it, but yeah.
the gentleman behind the gentleman with the red shirt.
My question is on the account you named as justificatory universalism. And So I'm just wondering that if we are talking about the human rights principles and those norms which can be justified based on some reasons, can we actually justify the principles based on universal reasons, or are you talking about different contexts? Because if we take, for example, the non-liberal context, can we actually talk about, can we reason based on the principles themselves as universally applied, or we have to find other common principles based on which we can reason. So I'm just not sure about how to justify the principles, the human rights principles, based on the cognitive element.
You mean specific human rights principles in relation to communication? I mean, you said it, I think at the beginning very well, that I'm proceeding from the fundamental intuition that we are reason giving beings, and fundamentally, communication is not always about reason giving, but it's also about reason giving and justifying claims to one another. And the questions about universalism really occur, the way I think about it, occur, whom do I consider a being worthy of my giving an account to, right? If we think historically, there are throughout history, it always helps sometimes to resort to some intuition here that is behind the formula. Beings who are not considered worthy of being given reasons to. They excluded the marginalized, the categories, from slaves, women, non-property, holders, non-Christians, non-Westerns, right? So it is always, universalism for me is always, at first, a claim about the recognition of your right to have rights. It is at first a claim about the reciprocal moral recognition of your fundamental personality. And this is not a definitional issue alone. I mean, I think that this is a political project. It's almost, to use a avenir. It's always an open project, because we think we know the moral personality claim of that, but we're always sometimes shocked, and we all have limits where our imagination does not extend, and we don't quite know. So there's a claim about inclusion, about fundamental reciprocal recognition. Then, if I understand the second part of your question, and maybe we can talk, when we're having some tea, because I wasn't quite sure. Then the issue becomes, I think it's what Richard was getting at with the notion of the iterativity of rights. Once the right to have rights has been established within the community, because the very abstract structure that this chapter sets out would not really help you settle the specific, the very specific, questions that may arise. For example, is there a right to democracy, right, which is a kind of, human right to democracy, which is my argument with Joshua Cohen. This very abstract framework of this chapter does not let you answer that question right away. We would need to introduce more intermediate principles. I hope I have understood you correctly, but please, let's talk afterwards as well.
Right, so the guy with the stripy shirt.
David Hall, Oxford University. I wanted to ask about the first point the Laura brought up. I imagine what these entities would say if they could, and what reasons they would give if they could. And I was thinking if that was right as well, then like maybe we would need to appeal to theories of human nature to fill out the details of what concrete and generalized other would be, what needs and what their sort of concept of dignity is that they would give if they could. And that might go as well, not just babies and mentally disabled, but I guess if we're thinking about animals, you said if an entity has the capacity to have harm, then there's some sort of reciprocal obligations. We might have to imagine the nature of that harm.
I'm a friend of the imagination. This opens up a big question. What I mean by the generalized and the complete other is I call this an involved phenomenology. In the sense that we are always at the same time aware of the other's likeness to us and yet fundamental difference from us. I mean, it depends on how far you want to push this. My student Carmen Deke here is always pushing me, saying that there's more Levinas in my work than I realized, but I don't know Levinas that well, so she's pushing me to say that there is, yes, indeed, but the way I think about it is that the distinction here is between our knowing this fundamental likeness and yet at the same time this moment of sort of irreducible difference that has to do also with my knowing very well that your affective emotional makeup, your body, otherness and whatever that we fulfill into that. Now, I would not want to bring in a category like the imagination at the very end, because I think that we really become, human beings. We become adults from children is by learning to take the standpoint of the other. I think this is fundamental to human socialization, that the capacity for empathy, and I could say a lot about it, but I'm sure some of you, you're all very young, but some of you are parents. One of the interesting things about children's development, when you look at it, and this philosophically very interesting, is the confusion that children have about pronouns. When they first learn my versus yours, right? I mean, sometimes a child will say, take me in my arms, right? Because the child hasn't quite learned to reverse the perspective in the attribution of the personal pronoun that I use. So for me, this process of call it imagination, call it empathy, I'm using more sort of a term that comes from cognitive social psychology, the capacity to take the standpoint of the other. This is fundamental to human growth. So it's there all along, and I think that how far do you want to expand this? How essential? I mean, I think that this is fascinating to pursue on its own right, whether or not it's a theory of human nature that has to do with human rights. I think that this is very, very crucial as this fertile field.
And we're already running nearly 10 minutes over, so I'm going to start grouping questions and not taking any more. Sorry, Rigetti and then the gentleman with the beard and the glasses could ask questions, and we are already running out, so as quick as possible.
Yeah, so my question first answer to Rich's question, and it seemed to me that your use of communicative action and your response presupposed a pre-political notion of human rights. So if this is correct, I was just wondering whether you could say a little bit more about when human rights are pre-political and they are political.
So I want to go back to the right to have rights, and the way you would interpret it to me to be recognized as someone entitled to legally protected rights. Because if this is at the core of a conception of human rights, and this should give us the answers that Laura was asking about, the bearer of duties and so on, then it seems to me that it becomes very important who is doing the recognizing, and how is recognizing is being done, and why is recognizing is being done. And so as I understand you, if someone is making a claim, maybe a human rights claim, you can understand this as some sort of invitation to discourse. And whether or not we enter this discourse, or we are willing to enter this discourse, depends on whether we recognize this person's right. So, and the question is, so how does this recognition work actually, and most importantly, what's the basis for this recognition? Because as you were saying before, as you say in the book, it seems to me it's really a formative insight. It's the insight that if we don't recognize this right, then we can't really enter into this discourse. So this would be a purely cognitive insight grounding my recognizing someone as this person. And so I'm wondering if that's all there is to it, or if there's another level or another source for my recognizing such a person. And this might have to do with your with the way you talk about the generalized and the concrete one, because I think this purely cognitive insight refers to seeing the other as generalized. But if I also see the other, or if I recognize the other as a concrete other, I'm wondering if there's something else involved, which is not purely cognitive, but maybe affective or emotional or something like that, and if that is also a precondition for our protecting human rights. So.
Okay. Coming back to the question of pre-political versus political, I think that I can now see that the term pre-political is throwing things off a bit, because what I really meant by that term is primarily referring to the structure of reciprocity and interaction, namely pushing away some of the attempts to define concepts of agency that used to be referred to in my generation as, the philosophy of possessive individualism, the idea of rights that we rightly or wrongly in caricature-like fashion attribute, to Hobbes, and maybe less of a caricature-like fashion attribute to Locke in the state of nature, the conceptualization of the right of property. So I was using that term to sort of do away. I didn't even engage with these arguments because it seems to me as if, right now, there really isn't that much contention about it. But what there is contention about is any kind of understanding of autonomous agency. And again, I should have used maybe the term of, interactive or communicative rather than political. Again, if you look at Griffin's definition of autonomous agency, he says, I do not need society, I do not need social relations in order to understand this concept. I don't know what that means. I hope that helps. So clearly, Laura's commentary helped me see that term is, throwing things off. But we can come back to it. The right to have rights. Very, very insightful point. I'm not sure I can do justice to you, but I see the dilemma here. Look, I agree with Axel Honneth's work that the struggle for recognition is both a moral and cognitive struggle. The right to have rights, the recognition of the other as a being entitled to rights, or as a being worthy of my giving reasons to, because we are all giving reasons to somebody who we're considered, otherwise we cannot be speaking beings, right? This is the speech, quasi-transcendental structure of communicative speech, if you wish. The interesting question is who we consider as a being